Publicly, they're called strategic partners. But behind the handshakes and the high-level diplomatic meetings, a much darker game might be at play. We're going to examine one of the world's most critical and, frankly, contradictory relationships, the one between the United States and India.
So it really boils down to this simple question, even if the answer is anything but. Is the United States a true ally to India? Or is it an adversary, just disguised as a friend? To figure that out, we have to look past the official statements and dig into the cold, hard math of global power.
And look, this isn't just some abstract theoretical question. Not at all. A recent event out in the Indian Ocean has thrown this entire partnership into question, and it's challenging the very foundation it's built on.
The facts of the incident, as laid out by the source, are pretty stark. An Iranian warship, the Iris Tina, was an official guest of the Indian Navy. It was there participating in the Milan 2026 exercises. But shortly after leaving Indian waters, it was destroyed. And intelligence assessments point to just one aggressor, a U.S. nuclear submarine.
Now, according to this analysis, this wasn't some random act of aggression. No, this was a carefully calculated message, and it was delivered with lethal precision. The message was really twofold. First, that India can't even guarantee the safety of its own state guests. And second, that the Indian Ocean isn't India's backyard. It's a theater where Washington calls the shots. And the response from New Delhi? Well, there was no official condemnation, a silence that speaks volumes. This incident, though, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. To really understand its significance from this perspective, we have to go back and look at the historical record. And what it suggests is a consistent pattern of strategic interference, all aimed at slowing down India's rise.
The alleged pattern goes back decades. You look at 1966, India's top nuclear scientist and its prime minister both die under very mysterious circumstances just weeks apart. Fast forward to 1971. As India moves to stop the genocide in what would become Bangladesh, America sends a nuclear-armed carrier, the USS Enterprise, to threaten them. Then in 1998, when India finally proves itself as a nuclear power, the U.S. responds by leading the entire world in imposing crippling sanctions.
So according to this analysis, these aren't just a series of disconnected, unfortunate events. They're seen as part of a long-term, covert strategy, a quiet campaign to make sure India would always have to depend on the West for its own defense.
Today, the argument goes the battlefield has changed. Direct military threats have been mostly replaced by economic pressure and technological sabotage. It's a new front, but it's part of a very old conflict. Publicly, you hear the U.S. call India a strategic defense partner. But in practice, it's labeled the nation a tariff king, hitting it with punitive taxes for making its own independent trade decisions, like, say, buying oil from Russia. The language of partnership seems to be masking a reality of intense economic pressure.
And this economic pressure, allegedly, it leads to forced deals. India has been pushed into defense and aviation agreements worth nearly $500 billion. From this viewpoint, it looks less like a partnership and more like a strategic transfer of wealth, making sure India's military stays reliant on American equipment.
The case of the Tejas light combat aircraft is put forward as a perfect, stark example. Right at a critical phase of production, the promised supply of American-made engines was just cut off. This move, this act of technological denial, is seen as a direct hit against India's homegrown defense industry, designed to undermine its capabilities and enforce that dependence.
Now, this strategy of containment is said to go way beyond India's own borders. It's framed as a geopolitical game of chess, one that's being played across the entire subcontinent. And the objective? To keep India contained, surrounded by a ring of instability.
You might have heard this strategy called divide and rule. The U.S. continues to supply military aid and F-16s to Pakistan. It's been accused of having a hand in the recent regime change in Bangladesh, and it exerts significant influence in both Sri Lanka and Nepal. The alleged goal here is to keep India bogged down with regional problems, preventing it from ever really becoming a global power. This strategy is also said to involve harboring certain assets. Individuals who are openly calling for the violent breakup of India are reportedly given safe haven, even legal protection, on U.S. soil. From this perspective, these figures are kept around as a form of leverage, a tool you can use to apply political pressure on New Delhi anytime its foreign policy doesn't quite line up with Washington's interests.
So, when you look at this whole pattern of behavior, from historical sabotage all the way to modern-day coercion, the source material argues it leads to one unavoidable strategic conclusion for India. The only real path forward, it argues, is the pursuit of what's called strategic autonomy. Now, this isn't about isolation. It's about having the capability to act in your own national interest without having to ask for permission, free from the veto of a foreign power, whether that power calls itself a friend or a foe.
That incident back in the Indian Ocean is presented as the final, undeniable lesson. A power that targets your guests right at your doorstep simply cannot be trusted to be your guardian.
For India, the ultimate takeaway from this viewpoint is that self-reliance isn't a choice. It's a matter of survival. A strong domestic defense industry and an independent economic path are seen as the only real shields in a world where the lines between ally and adversary are, well, deliberately blurred.
And all of this leaves us with a final fundamental question, one that goes far beyond any single country. In an international system that's governed by the cold pursuit of national interest, is the whole concept of a true, selfless ally just a diplomatic fiction?